Hi everyone, good morning.
Morning.
Okay, I don't see familiar faces from yesterday. So you guys joined yesterday as well? No.
I was given the link for today's class.
Okay. Right, let's just start here. Hope everyone can see my screen. So we did start talking about very basics of what cybersecurity is, threats are, vulnerability, what are exploits. I talked about zero-day exploit and some of the other bits and pieces. We'll continue with this today as well. Just talk about some of the other basics as well. And then next week, we will kind of start with things full blown when we start with the actual classes. Okay. So just to recap what we did and what we talked about yesterday, I talked about cybersecurity, how it differs from information security, how information security or traditional infosec used to be, how it has evolved into a cybersecurity program. Okay, what you do to prevent, detect, and respond to security threats, right? What a CIA is related to the user and the data confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Okay, and we also discussed what all are the additional things that cybersecurity offers in addition to infosec, things like risk management, intelligence about threats, incident response, proactively hunting for threats in your network. Okay, trying to locate something before an alarm goes off or some sort of an event occurs. So there are professionals who kind of try to do that proactively. Okay, and then we talked about threats, which is basically any sort of a danger to an asset. And I explained that an asset could be anything. It could be you yourself, or your data, or your devices, or your organization's devices. Okay, a country, their economy, etc. Anything is an asset. Okay, and there are always some sort of a threat against any of these assets. Okay, so asset could be termed as anything of an economic value. Okay, which might be owned by an individual or a corporation or an organization. Routers, servers, hard drives, laptops. It could be virtual things as well, databases, spreadsheets, trade secrets, intellectual property, okay, visual diagrams, Excel sheets, etc. Okay, so regardless of what type of an asset you discuss, if that asset is lost, damaged, or compromised, that is what we call as a threat. Okay, if it is lost, damaged, or compromised, there will be an economic loss to that organization. Okay. In addition to that, we also have something that we call as vulnerability, which can be termed as a weakness or a flaw. Okay, and it could be within the hardware, it could be within the software, it could be within the code, it could be some sort of a misconfiguration. Okay, it could be anything. Okay, so if there is a vulnerability, there are chances that there could be some sort of a threat that can make use of that vulnerability. Okay, and how does that happen is through an exploit. So exploit is what takes advantage of the vulnerability. Okay, and then we talked about how the vulnerabilities or how the vulnerability database or the ranking and everything happens through the CVEs. Okay, the common vulnerabilities and exposures database that we have, which is maintained by the United States Homeland Security Organization. Okay, US CERT, which sponsors the CVE whole development and the database and everything. And then depending upon how severe a vulnerability is, okay, so vulnerabilities could be, there could be a very less critical vulnerability, or it could be something informational, okay, so it could be of low relevance or low severity. They could be of a medium severity, they could be of a high severity, or they could be a critical vulnerability. Okay, so these scores that go for a vulnerability, for the weakness or the flaw, they are basically maintained, or they are scored through CVSS, Common Vulnerability Scoring System. Okay. And typically, like I explained yesterday, organizations, for the most part, care about the high and the criticals. Okay, these are the ones that they need to be cautious about more and more. Okay, um, lows, these are mostly informational, so they don't really will affect a lot or won't cause much harm to your assets. Okay, and then medium is kind of like the low hanging fruit. Okay, for some organizations, medium severity vulnerabilities are bad as well. For others, they are not so. Okay, but highs and criticals are typically where a lot of concentration goes to resolve them. Okay? And these would typically be CVSS score of 8.0 to 10.0. Okay. Now, if I circle back to threats, okay, so when I say threats, threats really can be categorized. You can also categorize them as events, okay, which in itself they affect the CIA, okay, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the organization's assets. All right, and there are lots of threats. They don't really need to be a hacker or an attacker itself. It could be a natural disaster as well. Okay, some sort of a weather or catastrophic damage, right? Hurricanes, storms, fire, floods, earthquakes, right? Or any other natural event that can cause a threat to an asset. Okay, and then you have your attackers and your hackers as well, which we typically call as threat actors. Okay, which could be an internal employee, okay, or it could be someone on the outside who is unauthorized and who is purposely attacking an organization's infrastructure or components or data, right? And then in addition to this, you also have things like your viruses and malware, right, um, which are an entire category of software tools that are basically malicious, and they're designed to damage or destroy a system or data, right? Then there could be events where an organization's or your own personal or confidential information has been disclosed. Okay, so anytime such a disclosure happens for any confidential information, it can be a threat to an organization. Okay, and then another form could be something like a DOS or a denial of service or a distributed denial of service attacks, which is typically against the availability part. Okay, someone could send um, lots of data, lots of traffic in a short period of time towards, let's say, a web server or a network to bring it down, to flood the network with what we call as useless traffic. Okay, so nowadays a lot of DOS attacks are done through botnets. Okay, previously we used to see a lot of ping-based or ICMP-based DOS packets. Okay, we used to call them ping of death. Okay, or we used to term them as teardrops. Okay, this was typically in the past. Nowadays, it's basically botnets that run or do this. Okay, and obviously, the hackers and the attackers, they're constantly developing their own new tools to sort of modernize their attacks as well. Okay. Now, I I wrote a term, or I basically mentioned a term called as threat actors. Okay, think of them as individuals, or maybe a team of individuals. Okay, who perform an attack or who are responsible for some sort of a security incident. Okay, that can impact an individual, that can impact an organization. So there are um, different categories or different types of threat actors. Okay, and you should just typically know these terms as well. So the very basic, a newbie or a beginner sort of a person who is just using, let's say, existing scripts. He does not know what that script does. Okay, but all he knows is to execute the script or run any tools and anything. Okay, they don't have any other expertise apart from that. We call them script kiddies. Okay, these are the people who are, kind of enthusiastic, maybe beginners who are using existing scripts or tools to try and hack into computers or networks. They don't really have the knowledge what they're doing. They don't really have the expertise to write their own scripts. Okay, so for example, if you maybe download something like Nmap, okay, or maybe if you install Kali Linux, Kali Linux comes with a bunch of different tools that can be used for both attacking, defending purposes, right? So if you don't know what those tools are doing, but you're just executing them without any knowledge or any other scripts for that matter, you'll be basically called as a script kiddie. Okay, so these are the novices, or we could also call them naives. Okay, so call them novice, or we could call them naive. And then we have organized crime groups. Okay, these are, let's just call them what we can think of as gangs of people. Okay, who are organizing crimes in a very systematic, in a very approachful manner, and their whole purpose is to steal information, scam people, and make money. Right. So nowadays, lots of scams are going on, especially with respect to UPIs and QR codes and WhatsApp. Okay, people requesting money over the phone, etc., sending you QR codes, asking you to enter your PIN, etc., etc. Okay, so these can be categorized as part of an organized crime. All right. We then have some advanced groups of people. Okay, we call them state-sponsored, state or government-sponsored. Okay, so these are the groups which are backed by a country's state or government. Okay, so these are highly knowledgeable professionals. They write their own scripts, they write their own complex exploits. Okay, they have tons of research and development data. Okay, so a lot of times state and government sponsored groups come from places like China, Russia. Okay, so a lot of times, if you follow the news and everything, a lot of times you must have heard things like Chinese hacker group, or maybe a Russian hacker group, or a Chinese government sponsored Russian hacker group. Okay, so these guys, they basically are doing the same thing. They are again stealing data, mostly intellectual property. Okay, and maybe trying to steal research and development data. Okay, from major organizations. Okay, so they are very sophisticated team of people, right? We then have something that we call as hacktivists. Okay, hacktivists, they are very similar to activists, right? So activists, what they do, they do rallies, right? They do protests, etc. Mostly for a social or a political purpose, right? Activists, they do not do organized crimes, they do not steal information, they do not scam people. Similarly, hacktivists, okay, so hacktivists do or carry out cybersecurity attacks as well, but their purpose is not to steal information, not to scam people, not to steal money, okay? Their main purpose is to promote a social or a political cause. Okay? But you would still put that as a crime, okay? Anytime without an organization or a user's consent, if you run any sort of an attack against them, their organization, their device, you are committing a cybercrime. Okay, so always remember that. Whatever your purpose might be, you are still committing a cybercrime. And the last of these is, I mean, we already are familiar with them, terrorist groups. Okay, so these groups are again mostly motivated through political or some sort of a religious belief. Um, and nowadays, I mean, like everything else, everything is, you know, fairly sophisticated nowadays. Networks, attacks, everything. Okay, so terrorist groups are also involved in carrying out cyber attacks. Okay, um, we were having this Russia-Ukraine conflict, right? So you must have heard that cybercrime had substantially increased in both the regions. Okay, so Russia and Ukraine, as their state and government-sponsored groups, right? They were attacking each other in the cyberspace as well. Okay, so you can have things like cyber war as well, where one country is attacking another country's prime locations, prime infrastructures, prime organizations. Okay, again, for the purpose of stealing, disrupting the infrastructure, okay, causing downtimes, etc. Now, originally, when we say the term hacker, okay, so originally this term was used for computer enthusiasts. Okay, so in the earlier days, a hacker was a person who really understood the internal workings of a system or a computer or the computer network. Okay, and he would kind of, for his own understanding, hack the system until he understood basically what everything was there about the system. Over time, what happened, these hackers, they became kind of known as individuals who broke into other organizations, other people, computers with some sort of a bad intent, some sort of a malicious intent. Okay, and another word, another term that came out in addition to that was that of a cracker. Okay, basically or mostly the same thing. Okay, but a cracker basically was what industry came out with, um, saying that a cracker is basically a criminal hacker. Okay, so a hacker initially was some sort of a good person, okay, who just did the hacking for his own understanding. But over time, when people started to crack into or move into other people's system for the purpose of stealing the information, stealing the data, etc. So the industry basically they came out with a new word, cracker, which basically was short for a criminal hacker. Okay, this used to describe individuals who would compromise the security of a system without the permission from an authorized person or an authorized body. Okay, so this was done to basically distinguish between good guys and bad guys. Okay, so there are good guys as well who do hacking, okay, for the benefit of the organization, for the benefit of the systems, to figure out the flaws before someone else figures it out them and then fix them. Okay, and then there are the bad guys, obviously. Okay, so all of this confusion then later led to the development of another keyword called as ethical hacker. Okay, and an ethical hacker was termed as a person who performs some sort of a security tests, vulnerability assessment activities to help the organization secure their infrastructure. Okay, so these are your good guys. So an organization might hire ethical hackers and give them consent and give them permission to hack their network so that they can, in obviously a controlled environment. So these ethical hackers are not going to steal the information. Okay, if they figure out a vulnerability, they would help the organization fix it. Okay, to secure their networks, their devices, their servers, etc. Okay, these are, industry typically calls them as white hat hackers. Okay, this also has gone through a naming change, kind of. These are known as black hat hackers. Basically, individuals who are performing illegal activities, something like organized crime. Okay, and then there is another term or another type of these categories of hackers. They're basically known as gray hat hackers. Okay, so the gray hats, they fall somewhere in between. Okay, these are individuals who would do everything legally. Okay, who will follow the law, won't break the law, but sometimes they would do the black hat hacking or the illegal activities as well. Okay, so they kind of wear both the masks. Okay, so such individuals, obviously, it would be unethical for an organization to employ such individuals to perform any sort of security assessment, security work for them. Okay, because you would never really be able to figure out whether they are on the black hat side or the white hat side. Okay, so you must have seen a lot of movies where there are individuals who are working both for the good of an organization or maybe for a country, for example, right? And then they're also doing something against them. Okay. Any questions? up until now?
None.
Okay, I mean, hopefully it's pretty straightforward. I'm not going into too much technical details as of right now. Just trying to get everyone up to speed of some of these basics. Okay.
Okay, it's right.
Okay. Now, another thing that nowadays, from a cybersecurity program and from cybersecurity perspective, is the relevance and the importance of having threat intelligence. Okay. Now, threat intelligence is very similar to any other sort of intelligence that you get, right? Might be some sort of a weather forecast information. Okay, so think of threat intelligence as knowledge about any existing or emerging threats. Okay, and they could be a variety of different things, right? What can an internal threat actor can do? What an external threat actor can do? What are their different sort of attacks? Okay, so what organizations and what security vendors like Cisco, Palo Alto, Fortinet, what they do is they try to convert a lot of these definitions, a lot of this information into one common knowledge that they can then relay across a variety of different ecosystems, basically. Okay, so for example, maybe if Cisco devices, Cisco firewalls, other Cisco security systems, products, Cisco intelligence team, it is basically learning about some sort of a new virus or some sort of a new attack that might be happening somewhere in Europe. Okay, so what Cisco can do is they can convert those into a common language and share it with the rest of the cybersecurity community. Okay, so share it with something like Palo Alto, something like Fortinet, or any other third-party vendors. Okay, because everyone, or one common job for everyone, is to protect the assets, protect against the threats. Okay, and when I say a common language, it's basically a standard in which the threat intelligence information can be shared or it can be conveyed. Okay, so there are a few examples of standards that have been developed for sharing, for consuming this threat intelligence information. Okay, one of them is STIX. Okay, this basically stands for Structured Threat Information and Expression. Okay, so again, it's an express language. Okay, that has been designed for sharing the cyber attack information, and this STIX data can contain things like IP addresses or domain names of bad servers. Okay, which typically we call it as C2C servers or command and control servers. Okay, or information about malware. So STIX was originally developed by MITRE, and it is currently being maintained by OSs. Okay, so you can go on to stixproject.github.io if you want to get more information about STIX. Another form of let's just say language or a transport mechanism is TAXI. Okay, it stands for Trusted Automated Exchange of Information. Okay, again, it's an open transport mechanism that basically standardizes how automatically we can exchange cyber threat information. Okay, this was again developed by MITRE, and it is currently being managed by OSs. Okay, and you can get the same information about this on the Taxi Project website. taxiproject.github.io. Okay. You then have the Open IOC, okay, Open Indicators of Compromise.
Will that be something like virus total?
Right. Okay, something very similar to virus total.
And just for an elaboration on sticks and taxi, are these like some kind of packages that they offer? Like I'm just going through the platform, I see that they provide sticks 2.1 packages. So is this some kind of packages that they would offer and then it gets updated in a particular
Think of
server?
them as like protocols, like transport protocols. Okay, so there would be, for example, let's say if I, right, want to share some sort of a threat intelligence information, okay, I could have a server, okay, where I could, upload the threat intelligence, and then I could have this server talk either sticks or taxi. Okay, and then you maybe have a firewall and you want to consume the information that I'm sharing through my web server. So both of us will communicate over sticks or taxi, and I would be able to share the information with you. So
So
think of
that
this like
sorry to interrupt. So that would become the baseline, as in that would be compared by the firewall IDS, IPS, or IDPS.
correct,
Okay.
right? That's the main purpose. Yes. Okay, so it's basically a standardized mechanism. So rather than using things like maybe FTP or secure FTP or maybe HTTP, HTTPS to deliver and consume this information, um, from purely a threat intelligence perspective, the industry basically developed some of these standards. Okay, call them transport protocols, call them frameworks. Okay, whatever might be useful. So similarly, another one that we have is the Open IOC or the indicators of compromise. Okay, so when we get in the trainings and everything, I'll go into more of what IOCs are or indicators of compromise are. But think of IOCs as mostly information about how and what a particular attack must have done for the network or to the network. Okay, whether the attack was carried out to exfiltrate data, whether it was done to have your internal endpoints connect to some external command and control servers, okay, or they were done to make some changes on the devices, okay, variety of different things. Okay, so these indicators of compromise, they basically highlight that information. Okay, so OpenIOC is an open framework again for sharing threat intelligence. Okay, in I think it says it's mostly a very easy to digest format. Okay, so if someone is interested, you can look into openioc.org. Okay, and the last one that I'll mention here, and there are others as well, right? But these are four most commonly that you would see. These two you would see being utilized on Cisco next generation firewalls as well. Okay. So OpenIOCs, and then the last one is my OpenC2. Okay, the same thing that I was talking about, the C2C, the command and control. So it's the same thing, open command and control. Okay, so this is mostly from the perspective of command and control cyber defense technologies. Okay, so OpenC2 is basically you can call this a forum. Okay, and this is basically facilitated by the US NSA, okay, the National Security Agency, and it is currently or it is now also managed by OSs. Okay. So if someone wants to know more about OSs, they can go to oss-open.org. Okay. So again, you should understand that there are many other open source and non-security focused sources that you can still leverage to get and consume as much threat intelligence as possible. Okay, it could be things like social media, other forums, blogs, vendors' websites, okay, RSS feeds. There is another very good GitHub repo. Okay, if someone is interested, so you should probably bookmark it, and you should, from time to time, you should reference that, which includes thousands of references and resources related to threat intelligence, things like threat hunting, ethical hacking, digital forensics, incident response, things like vulnerability research, exploit development, etc. Okay, so if anyone is interested, you can look at hackerrepo.org. Okay, so we might look at some of the resources from this throughout our training as well. Okay. Now, let's talk about. So we have tried to understand what cybersecurity is, etc., etc. Now, you must have heard the term viruses a lot. Okay, everyone must have heard the term virus. Okay, and when we hear the term virus, you basically just think of, something bad happening on the device. It being slow, not responding, it's showing up ads. Okay, you kind of open up a website and then it kind of redirects you to some sort of an ad, etc. That's what we kind of think traditionally from the perspective when we say virus. Okay. However, there are different categories. Okay, and the different categories of viruses, but there is a bigger umbrella term as well. So the bigger or the higher level umbrella term is that of a malware. Okay, and malware, so if I break this into two parts here, this first part, this stands for malicious. Now this part here, it is software. So malicious software is what we call as malware. And be it a virus, be it any other category of those harmful things, they are nothing but they are pieces of code that have been written to do something bad. Okay, so there are codes that are written to do something good. Okay, maybe things like whoever wrote Windows 10 or Windows 11 or Linux, right? That's for the purpose to help you get your work done for lots of different things, business perspective, entertainment perspective, etc. However, some people can also write bad codes, which can corrupt systems, which can cause devices to get rebooted, okay, which could steal information, which could encrypt the data. Okay, so that's what we call it as malware, which is malicious software, or you could just call them bad code. Okay, badly written pieces of software. Okay, and there are a variety of different forms of malware. Okay, one common or very commonly heard ones are your viruses or worms. Okay, now the thing that makes viruses unique is that a virus typically needs some sort of a host program or a file to infect. Okay, so viruses will require some type of user interaction. Okay, so it would be embedded in some sort of a file, maybe some sort of an Excel sheet, maybe embedded within the macros, right? So once you open the file, you enable the macro, it executes that code, that software, in turn, which infects or affects your devices, right? That's your virus. On the other hand, a worm, again, it's very naturally taking word. Okay, so you must have seen a worm in your real life, right? Could be anything. A worm, just like it can travel, right? So a computer worm can also travel from system to system, but without any human interaction. Okay, so that's why it's a little bit more dangerous than viruses, because once a worm gets executed, it can replicate again and infect more and more systems automatically. It does not need human interaction. Okay, so for example, a worm can email itself, okay, to an organization's, to everyone in the organization. And then it can repeat that process again and again from each user's computer until it completes that infection across and there is no device left to be infected. Okay, and this massive amount of traffic can also lead to denial of service very quickly. Okay, so that's why worms are typically they are quite dangerous. If you are interested in, um, hearing about or reading about some of these, there's a very famous worm which infected something like in 1988. So it was able to infect about 10% of all the internet connected computers at that time in 1980. I think it was 1987 or 1986. Okay, it was called as the Morris worm. Okay, so I mean, it was an experiment that was done. Okay, the Morris worm, but I mean, it kind of moved out from that experimental phase and it kind of went out of control. Okay, so I think it was created for some sort of a lab experimental purposes, but it kind of, let's say, leaked out on the internet. Okay, and it caused quite um, quite a good amount of devices affected, right? So 10% in 1980s, right? You could think of how big of a effect it did at that point in time. Okay, and there are some others, lots of others that have happened as well. Okay, so time to time I'll basically give you some references of some of these names so that you can go back and you could read um, some of these things. Now there is another category of these malwares which are very closely related to viruses and worms. They're called as spyware. Okay, spywares, again, they have the word as spy. Okay, which basically means that these malicious softwares known as spywares, they typically hide themselves. Okay, most users won't know that there is a spyware installed on their device, and the main purpose for them is to steal information from the user. Okay, and when I say steal information, they could be tracking any sort of keys that are pressed by the user. Okay, so if a user goes to a banking website and he types in his credential, this spyware will be making a note of those key logging that will be happening. Okay, and then can share that information with someone over the internet automatically. Okay, in addition to that, spywares can also redirect your web traffic with those annoying pop-ups or ads that you see a lot of times. Right nowadays, um, it's not that bad, but it used to be very bad during those Windows XP, Windows 7 period. Okay, and many users, I mean, when you see those pop-ups and everything, we used to kind of term those being as viruses as well, right? Hey, my computer is affected by virus. I get these pop-ups, etc. Right? But those are actually spywares. Another good name for them is adwares. Okay, again, make note of these keywords. They are responsible for doing the ads, right? So spyware can do both of things. Adwares, they typically only their only purpose is to showcase you advertisements. Okay, they won't steal any information. They won't do or they won't harm the device or your data in any way. Okay, but they would show you advertisements. Okay. Now, before I talk about the some of the other types, um, how are these transmitted? Okay, how do you transmit them, or what parts of a system or device they can infect? Okay, so again, transmissions have changed. Okay, or means of infections have changed over the years. Malwares typically depend on people to spread them. Okay, like I said, viruses, they require human activity, and human activity could be something as simple as powering on a computer. Okay, or maybe if you plug in a USB stick, you executing an auto run for that USB or any external hard drive, or maybe you opening up an email attachment. All of these are categorized as a human activity, and they are enough to initiate or spread the infection. Okay, so there can be lots of infections that can be done by these devices. Okay, um, things like a BIOS infection, they could infect the BIOS. Okay, and this typically makes the system completely inoperable. Okay, or the system might hang before even passing the post. Okay, the power on self test. Then we can have file infections, very common nowadays, especially. Windows files are the most infected ones, exe formats, DLL formats, okay, even ISOs or maybe images, okay, or maybe Word documents, spreadsheets, Excels, macro enabled files, okay, maybe BAT format files, okay. um, File infection, I already talked about macro infection, okay. um, then within your viruses, there are some other very complex or very complicated types of viruses as well. Okay, and when I say complicated, um, it's it's typically just the way that those viruses have been written, and those viruses are kind of working to avoid being detected. Okay, so the main purpose when these viruses or these malicious softwares, these malwares are written, for the most part, its developers, they don't want that piece of code to be detected, obviously. Okay, because if your system, if your antivirus, for example, or if, for example, any other device is able to detect it, it might remove it or it might stop its execution, right? So for that purpose, a lot of complicated viruses are written as well. Okay, so for example, if I go into virus, you have things like stealth virus. um, you have cluster virus. You have something that we call as a polymorphic virus. Okay, you also have multipartite virus. Okay, so again, stealth viruses and polymorphic virus are kind of same. They kind of work in such a way that you might not be able to detect, or simple antiviruses might not be able to detect them, right? That's why nowadays there is a requirement to have some sort of an AI or an ML based antivirus or protection systems. Okay, so for example, polymorphic viruses. So polymorphic viruses are such that every time they execute, they change their code. Okay, so if an antivirus today detects a polymorphic virus, when it executes the next time, the code would be completely changed. The same antivirus will not be able to detect that this virus was previously detected in such a way. Okay, so you could call it as a beauty of the polymorphic virus in a bad way as well. Okay, but those are polymorphic viruses. Again, they are obviously complexly written, and the whole purpose is for them to evade antiviruses, evade IPS, IDSs. Okay, because every time they execute, they change. They also change their signatures. Okay, so it becomes pretty difficult for devices to keep a track of those signatures if that virus is changing it every time it executes. Okay, um, the cluster viruses that you have, these are responsible for modifying the directory entries. Okay, so if I talk about very briefly about how um, the file management purpose happens within a device, so you always have users or system processes, being connected. So you might have some sort of a exe file pointing to, let's say, a DLL file, or maybe it connecting to some sort of a system32 file. Okay, that's how the execution works. Now, what a cluster virus can do is it can change this entry to point it to itself rather than to the actual program. Okay, so when you actually execute an exe file or a DLL file or a system file, you would in turn will be executing the virus itself. Okay, so they are capable of changing these directory entries within your system. Okay, similarly, multipartite, they are basically, when we call as multipartite, it basically means that they have more than one propagation method. Okay, so it could be that they might infect both the boot sector of the device and also the programming files. Okay, so if you want to know more about this, this is a very interesting virus, multipartite. So you can look at Natus. Okay, this is basically Saturn, the devil. Okay, if you um, follow a lot of movies and everything. Okay, so this is Saturn spelled backwards, Natus. Okay, so just read about the Natus virus. Okay, so you'll get some more interesting information about those types of viruses or the multipartite ones. Okay, now once your system has been infected by either of these, okay, the malware basically can do a lot of things. So for example, if it's something like a ransomware, okay, whose sole purpose is to encrypt your devices with such an encryption or in such a format that you cannot decrypt it with readily available tools. Okay, and the whole purpose is it has that ransom keyword in its name. Okay, so the whole purpose for a ransomware is to extract money, is to extract ransom. In exchange, to be provided you with the decryption key to be able to decrypt and make use of your data again. Okay, so some malware, something like worms or something like ransomware, they spread very quickly, and they can be categorized as a fast infection. Okay, so these infect basically any file that they are capable of infecting. Okay, so as they move through the systems, they will keep infecting every single file that they are able to. Okay, there are some viruses that limit the rate of infection. Okay, for example, regular viruses or maybe spywares or adwares. Okay, you can have them fall in the category of sparse infection. Okay, and sparse infection basically just means that the virus basically takes its time to infect other files or spread the damage. Okay, one thing that hackers use sparse infection is to avoid detection. Okay, so sparse infection viruses, they can sit in your system for maybe weeks, months before getting triggered. Okay, and the whole purpose is to not create too much noise on the network. Okay, because if there is too much noise, there's too much activity that's happening on the network, something like worms or something like which ransomwares do, there are chances that the security measures that you have in place, it might pick up that information pretty quickly. Okay, there are some viruses whose whole purpose is to wait and load themselves into the RAM. Okay, which is an example of basically viruses that spread through the boot sector or boot sector viruses. Okay, they are typically very difficult to detect and remove because the only time that they will load or do the activity is when the device boots, is when the RAM basically gets initialized. Okay, so your antiviruses will typically will not be able to detect them. Okay, so boot sector viruses are very difficult to detect and remove in itself. Okay, so you would typically have to re-image the device as a whole. Okay, and sometimes that still might leave traces of those boot sector viruses. Okay, so that's why you see a lot of advancements that are being made by security vendors. Okay, a lot of these antivirus companies, security vendors, they are trying to develop better ways to detect malware. Okay, and the malware creators are kind of doing the same thing. They're trying to match against these vendors and trying to develop malware that is even harder to detect. Okay, so if you want to, again, if you want to read about the flame. It's basically a malware. So it is one of the, or I think it is termed as the most sophisticated malware to have been developed till date. I think it came out in 2012. Okay, and it was sophisticated because it could spread one thing. It could spread to other systems over a local network, over a LAN, but it could also record audio. It could take screenshots from systems. It could act as a keylogger. It could record keylogging activity or keyboard activity. And it could also infect devices and make them into Bluetooth beacons. So that, so think of this, it infects this device, for example, it makes it a Bluetooth beacon. Now this device can then try to connect over Bluetooth to other devices and then infect these devices as well. Okay, or get information from those other devices. Okay, so it was a very sophisticated virus that was a malware that was developed at that time, 2012. Okay, almost, I mean, a decade or more than a decade ago. Okay, so that I already talked about the polymorphic virus here. There is also something that is called as a Hox virus. Okay, this is just a hoax, basically. Okay, this is basically when a virus is not a virus. Okay, so it could look very similar to saying that it is a virus, maybe some sort of an email or some sort of message or something which you might feel that, hey, this might contain some bad information if I execute it. Okay, so I mean, there are things like this. So this is not really a virus. This is just some sort of an email, some sort of a message highlighting that there might be something bad. Okay, but in effect, it's just a hoax. Okay. Any questions? There are a couple of others that I want to talk about as well. Okay. So I'm pretty sure. I mean, if at least when I started learning more about these, obviously, initially we know is a virus. Okay, but then when you try to go into the details, you kind of figure out that there are lots of these, variety of these, okay, just within the category of virus. Okay, so you might have seen a lot of the behavior across in other systems, maybe if news channels, etc. Right, so you now might be able to do a one-to-one against. Okay, this is what ransomware means, this is what a worm means, or this is basically a spyware or an adware, and then a couple of others which I'll talk about as well. So now, in addition to this, there are another interesting categories of Trojans. Interesting categories of malware, which are basically called as Trojans. Okay, Trojans. They. How many of you here has watched the movie Troy? Any Hollywood
Yeah,
fans?
yeah, what's that
You
movie?
have. So during that, when if you remember, the Greeks built that giant wooden horse which
Yes,
had kind of like a trap door in its belly, right? And they tricked, or the Greeks tricked the 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 city of Troy to actually take that horse in, and when there is darkness, the Greeks come out and then they open the gates and allow other soldiers to come into the city, right?
yes,
That's an example of a Trojan, that horse. Okay, so that horse was technically, from that movie perspective, was supposed to be kind of like a peace, kind of a treaty, kind of a thing. Okay, so that's what Trojans are. They are programs that pretend to do one thing, but when they are actually executed, they actually perform some sort of a malicious activity. Okay, so a software Trojan horse. So a lot of times, if you have run antivirus scans, you would see the antiviruses blocking some files and terming them as Trojan horse. Okay, so a software Trojan horse is based on the same concept. You as a user might think that a file looks harmless and it's safe to run, but after the file is executed, it basically delivers or executes a malicious payload. Okay, so a very common example is an email with a PDF, or with a PDF looking like file, which when you execute will not be a PDF, but it might execute, or it might actually be an exe file. And you might say, how is that possible? How can a PDF or how can an exe look like a PDF? There are software tools out there which can do that, and they're freely available. Okay, so you don't really need to pay anything. Um, you don't really need to do any additional studies to be able to use that software, right? You just put a source file, let's say an exe file, a malicious exe file that I have created. You upload it into that software. You tell it what should the destination file type should be, and it's going to create it. It hardly takes about 10 seconds. Okay, so that's what Trojan horses is. So a lot of times when you run antiviruses, maximum number of times you would see at least some Trojan horses being detected by the antivirus software. A lot of times they are false positives. So, for example, if it is, let's say, for example, not really sure how many of you do or play any sort of video games or anything. I mean, I do. So, a lot of times, if you execute an exe file, okay, it gets tagged by the antivirus as a Trojan horse, okay, because that exe, it tries to talk with some system files, tries to check a couple of things, tries to create some system files, okay, to store the data, store the data content, so the saved data content, etc. The antivirus is kind of detected as a Trojan because it is, kind of appearing to be an exe file, but is also trying to make changes to your system directory. Okay, but a lot of times it's false positive when you actually know the source of the exe, or for example any other file. Okay, and without knowing the source, whether it's legitimate or not from where you download the file, and if an antivirus is tagging it as a Trojan horse, then I would probably listen to the antivirus. Okay, so that's what a Trojan horse really is. Okay, Now, the good thing about Trojans is, unlike worms, they cannot spread themselves. Okay, they have to be triggered. Okay, so I have to believe that the file is maybe an image that I'm looking for, right? And I want to see what the image is. I don't know that there's an exe file behind that. Okay, so they have to rely um, on a not so curious user, okay, a not so informed user to be able to spread and execute. And there are a variety of different Trojans as well. Okay, just like viruses, Trojans have their own categories. Okay, depending upon what they are trying to do or for what reason they basically have been created. So, for example, I'll write more common ones, which you might see or might get asked on the exams as well. A very common one is a RAT, remote access Trojan. Okay. Again, always look at these keywords. Okay. They kind of give you the answer of what they basically are. Remote access Trojans, they allow an attacker full control of the system. Okay. So let's say this user, it downloads a PDF file, okay, which is basically an exe, and it executes it, okay, so the user has no knowledge, and it installed some sort of a software in the background since it is an exe. Now that software has in the background opened up a random port, and it's listening on that random port for connections. Now I, as an attacker, I'm sitting here somewhere on the internet, right? And I could then connect to this port. Okay, obviously it's much more sophisticated than that. Okay, but you kind of get the idea. Okay, so remote access Trojans, they usually set themselves up as a client server program so that the attacker can basically connect to the infected system and control it remotely. This is also known as a backdoor. Okay, and a very commonly distributed Trojan out in the world as well. Okay, read about poison ivy. Okay, it's an example of a rat. Next is something that we would have seen or heard about a lot of times, data hiding. Okay, so there are Trojans that are capable of hiding a user's data, right? Ransomwares. So this type of Trojan, obviously, it restricts by encrypting, infecting the system. And until and unless a ransom is paid to the creator of the malware, the restriction cannot be removed. Okay, and there have been lots of ransomware attacks. Okay, obviously, the most famous was the WannaCry, which happened. I think it was in 2017. Right? It basically got termed as cyber tsunami. Okay, because that was, I mean, the time when the whole cyber concept was taking its place, and before that we had not heard about a lot of ransomware attacks. Okay, there had been a lot of attacks or a lot of hacking attempts, worms, etc. before that, but WannaCry was very severe. Okay, so I think it affected somewhere around 150 countries across the world, and unruly number of computers were infected by WannaCry at that point in time. Okay, I think the damages, they kind of went up to I think about 4 to 5 billion US dollars across the damages that WannaCry caused at that time. Okay, so it was, I mean, it is kind of termed more or less as more than a cyber attack. Okay, it affected governments, businesses, healthcare systems, everything. Okay.
Was this the first time ransomware was used, or was it something that was there since ages?
I mean, as far as I remember, my knowledge goes, this was the first time that that something like ransomware came into picture. Okay.
Yeah, it
Um,
originated somewhere from the WikiLeaks thing, and then it gets connected to that
Correct.
shadow thing. I remember there was this group called some Shadow.
Right. I mean, it's still pretty active nowadays, and so nowadays what they are doing is they're selling ransomware as a service. Okay, so you can connect with them, pay them. They're going to create a ransomware malware for you. Okay, per your requirements. So that's why it's basically ransomware as a service. I mean, I think that's what I kind of remember reading about them. So that's where we have progressed. So we are not just doing things software as a service, but people are also offering now malware as a service and ransomware as a service as well. The other category is, and I kind of remember this virus's name because it connects to the Greek mythology. Okay, so there is a category for e-banking Trojans as well. Okay, and again, the main purpose is to intercept and basically make use of the victim's banking information. Okay, these do something that we call as an HTML injection attack or a form grabber, and the whole purpose is to be able to steal the information. Okay, so what this looks like is, from you as a user's perspective, okay, it will appear that you are actually accessing a financial website, right? So maybe let's say I go to hdfc.com. Okay, now what the attacker can do is it can create a false web page on top of this. Okay, that's why it's called an HTML injection. Okay, so this overlay that you have on the website, it will look very similar to hdfc.com with a couple of differences, obviously. Okay, now again, a lot of these attacks, they basically are successful because of uninformed or not so technical users, okay, who would not really care much of what they see on the web page. They see hdfc.com, we are good. Okay, so this overlay web page here, this form here, this will obviously have you put in credentials and everything, but it won't do anything, okay, because it's not connecting to the HDFC server's backend. Okay, but it will, or those credentials that you enter, they will basically get passed on to someone, an attacker, basically. Okay, so Zeus um, is an e-banking Trojan. Zeus is one of the examples that basically was created for this purpose. Okay, you then have DOS based ones. Okay, denial of service. Okay, then you have proxy-based Trojans, you have for FTP as well, okay, which are basically designed to work on port 21, okay. And then you also have antivirus disablers. So they are created to attack and kill antivirus and software firewalls specifically. Okay, so not attack the system. So their first goal is to disable and attack and disable the antivirus softwares that are running. And after that, they can go on and begin to infect the actual users or the device itself. Okay, and behind these Trojans, as you can see, the goal is pretty simple: to steal credit card information, maybe to steal financial information, maybe to steal electronic and digital wallet information. Okay, steal passwords, any insider information, any data storage information. Okay. And again, the infection mechanisms for Trojan, just like we saw with viruses here, you can do it through BIOS, file, macro, etc. Trojans typically are going to be the same thing. Okay, that's why you are asked to not download anything from torrents. Okay, from any other P2P networks. Okay, or maybe download something from public instant messaging groups or rooms. Okay, there is also a very commonly utilized platform known as IRC, Internet Relay Chat. Okay, these are full of individuals who are basically ready to attack any newbies. Okay, so they could entice you into downloading some very expensive free program or application, but embedded within that could be some sort of a Trojan, could be a remote access Trojan as well. Okay, so that's why a lot of these things you tend to block on your network. P2Ps, IRCs, any public instant messaging. Okay, that's why organizations, they don't allow these on the network. Obviously, you cannot block emails, right? Email attachments are a very common infection mechanism. That's why you have your corporate infosec trainings where you are taught again and again to be aware of phishing attacks, to be aware of email attachments or links within emails that you're not supposed to click. Okay. Similarly, nowadays you also have a lot of SMS messages for scams over WhatsApp as well. Okay. Um, People could be impersonating applications that you download. Okay, especially from the Android store or the Google Play Store. Okay, Apple Store, I mean, I won't say that it is foolproof, but it is still very, very secure with respect to the Android or Google Store. Okay, so attackers can impersonate applications. So sometimes you might see a very common application might have or might appear to have different iterations by different publishers. Okay, so that's why it's very important for your device to verify the digital signature of the publisher when it's installing the application on your device. Okay, a lot of Android applications you can download the SDK file from anywhere on the internet. Okay, and sometimes it fails the digital verification that your system wants to do, and a lot of times people kind of bypass that, obviously, right? Because they want to run that new shiny application, some expensive application that obviously they don't want to pay money for. Okay, so very important, make sure if you're trying to install any applications, the digital signature verification for the publisher is passed by your device. And if it's failing, then you should do some more investigation as to why. Open up a case with Google or maybe with Apple and let them know about that. Okay. So you would see a lot of times there's this happening within the Google store. Okay, you would have an original application which would be priced pretty high, obviously, since it's an original application by the original publisher. And then you have some fake application which would appear to be very similar to it and fairly less than the original's price. Okay, so this is one of the tactics that attackers use to distribute malicious mobile-based applications or mobile malware as well. Right? And then another very famous category is that of freewares. Okay, so things are available on basically websites like maybe SourceForge or something. Okay, so always remember, nothing in life is free. Okay, typically, if something is free, then you are going to be the cost behind it, or you're going to be the price behind it, or your device is going to be the price behind it. Okay, so most softwares, if they are free, they would be free by the publisher itself. Okay, so users typically take a big risk when they download freeware from unknown sources. Okay, I mean, it's fine. I mean, I'm guilty for that as well, right? But you still need to be very well aware about, especially on your corporate devices. Okay, personal devices, still not okay. Okay, but at least on your corporate device, you should be very well aware of where you are downloading the resources from. That's why nowadays organizations have their own application stores, okay, where they publish the approved applications, and you cannot run any other application apart from that. A lot of organizations block execution of exes, download of ISO files, DLLs, etc., for this very reason. Okay, and obviously having a good email behavior is very important, right? Always understand that emails are the most widely used forms of malware propagation. Most of the ransomwares that have happened have been because of some guy who thought that the email is good enough and he clicked a link or he downloaded an attachment. It takes just that to spread the ransomware. No firewalls, no security solutions will be able to do anything. Okay. All right. Um, I think we'll probably end it here today. Okay. So I think we have reached the 1.5 hour mark for today. Next weekend, hopefully I'll see some of you next weekend, starting next weekend. That's when we'll actually start. We'll continue with this itself, but we'll actually be going through 2.5, 3 hour classes, the regular ones. All right. Anyone has any questions for me today for anything with respect to the classes, the
Yes.
training, today's topic? Yeah, go ahead.
Uh, do you want to record this as well? The question? This is not specific to this class though, but specific to the course itself. I
Hmm.
really wanted because I have the syllabus open in front of me, so I have
Okay.
some questions
Hmm.
how this course is going to turn out to be because I've done some courses before on firewall, like Palo Alto, not a security oriented course, although this turns out to be a requirement in place where I work. So yeah, I was going through the syllabus, and it seems most of it is theory. Is it true that there is some area where we configure some device, or are we going to be working on some particular tech stack of Cisco? Uh,
So, what course or what syllabus are you looking at?
I'm looking at S score uh,
Right. So the
350701.
right. So for the S core, the only theoretical section is that module one for security concepts.
Yes.
That's the only thing that is going to be there, and that's what I'm trying to go over
Hmm.
currently.
Hmm.
After that, when we go into the network security concepts and everything, that's when we will actually be doing the hands-on part. We'll be looking at ASA, firewall, ICE, etc. as well.
And are we going to use EVNG, uh, the
Mostly,
one with
yes.
mostly EVNG for
Correct.
this?
Right. Because
Is there
everything can be virtualized, and Cisco is pretty generous with respect to the evaluation licenses as well. Okay, so you should not really have much issues with respect to running all of these products in the lab. And wherever it's not possible to it, I'll probably highlight that as well.
okay? And could you just mention the devices that we would be covering here? I'll just make a note of it as well as you.
Yeah, sure. So it's ASA firewalls,
Mhm. Mhm.
okay, next generation firewall. And then we'll be doing the routers and switch based security as well, infrastructure security. We'll be looking at VPNs, both from firewalls perspective as well as the routers. And then ICE is another important concept. We'll be looking,
ICE,
right,
how do you
we'll,
spell that?
ISE,
ICE, okay.
right. And then we'll be doing WSA and ESA,
WSA and ESA.
right. There's going to be Stealth Watch.
Mhm.
There is going to be Cisco Umbrella, Cisco Duo.
So Cisco Umbrella would have SASE as well?
I can talk about it and I can cover that, but it's not really something that you would be tested on Escort.
Okay.
Okay, but I'll talk about in general because if you're going to look at the S score, they have mentioned Umbrella SIG, okay,
Mhm.
which is a secure internet gateway, and one
Yes.
requirement for it is to. So there are multiple ways in which you can do SIG. It can be part of SD-WAN, it cannot be part of SD-WAN, okay, but you can still do SIG. Okay, so I'll still talk about what real SASE is. If if you would want me to discuss that, then I can surely discuss that.
Okay.
Okay,
And these are all different appliances,
correct,
or yes.
correct.
So when we talk about Cisco appliances in general, because this is something that I've been wondering because I've worked on Palo Alto, on FortiGate, and these appliances have everything in one box or
Mm-hmm.
in one platform itself. And when I see Cisco, I always see things being you know. I mean, separated from each other. You
Mm-hmm.
have an email gateway, which is not a firewall, but it's an evil, secure email gateway appliance just
Right.
for that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, why is it that Cisco doesn't, offer this as a single vendor product in a single platform, and why does it differentiate it in terms of hardware appliances?
So let's just take for that for example. So I worked in Palo Alto's as well. So Palo
Mhm,
Alto um, does do some email protection, okay,
mhm,
but it's mostly from the perspective of just analyzing it for vulnerabilities or malicious signatures. Okay, it cannot do message body rewriting, right? It cannot do a lots of additional things which ESA can do. First thing. Okay, so it is from a firewall perspective. That is something that Cisco's firewall also can do. Okay, so if you're just trying to send files and everything, attachments within email, within let's say through SMTP or POP or IMAP, it can still work that way. Okay, but if you want to have much more granular control over anything that's being done SMTP,
mhm,
okay, from a relay perspective, from a domain perspective, right, what domains you want to allow, what domains you don't want to allow, restrict the traffic, etc., that neither Palo Alto's firewall can do nor Cisco's firewall can do. Okay, so you need a specialized device for that, which is the email gateway. Second reason is the whole next generation firewalls concept. It has been coming out for maybe let's say the last 5 6 7 years only. Okay,
mhm.
earlier to that we used to just have the layer 3 layer 4 firewalls. Okay, the email gateway product is much older than that. Okay, so Cisco basically acquired Iron Port, back in the day, through which they got the WSA proxy product and then the ESA product. Okay, so there are still situations where, or there are still organizations where are still using these products already. Okay, so and then again, like I explained, your next generation firewall cannot protect everything against or everything with respect to emails.
Okay, so it's all about doing it the right way, or maybe having that extra leverage to protect
Mostly
against.
yes.
Yeah.
Mostly yes. So for example, if you take Fortinet, for example, Fortinet has an 40 email product or
Hmm.
40 mail product, okay, which is doing something similar to ESA. All right. And then they also, their FortiGate firewalls can still do email spam and anti-spam thing, okay, which is a very small part with respect to the email security. Okay, like I said, email security, and I've been explaining that as well. Email security has been is a very common exploit point, and email security is very important, right? So a lot of
I've gone through
organizations.
this open source mail scanner,
Mhm,
open source, and I was just comparing it with some of the features that some of the prominent firewall vendors are offering.
right.
So it seemed almost like similar, an open source technology is of mail scanner is providing almost similar features
Right,
as
true,
compared to
correct.
yeah, but whether it's doing it or not, that's a different question.
Whether
So
it's
is
doing it
that
or
the
not,
reason why
whether
the
it's doing
Cisco
it or
pro
not, that's the purpose as well.
Mhm.
And then the another reason is corporates, they don't do open source, okay, because there is no support behind it, right? What if something does not work as intended with open source, right? So you as an open source adopter, you would be responsible for supporting and fixing those things yourself,
Yep.
right? Versus if I buy something like a 40 mail or an ESA product, I pay for the support. If something goes bad, I need to update my device. There is some bug and everything that's been happening. I'm paying that vendor to fix that for me. Okay, so open sources, they are typically a good thing if I have, let's say, a small home office, maybe a Soho kind of an environment, right? But large organizations, I mean, I don't think so they will ever adopt open source again for these very reasons. Okay, so again, for everything, right? Maybe for IPS, right? I could maybe implement something like Bro or Suricata,
Mhm.
right? I could implement for those IPSs. I could implement open source Snort as well. But I would need to hire additional workforce to be able to write those rules within the
Yep.
IPS,
Yep.
right? So that's much more headache that I will have on my IT team. And then every time a new threat comes out, okay, my team or I need to have some sort of a research behind us as well, an intelligence team which can gather
Mhm.
that research, develop those stuff for me, for my organization itself, right?
And
Again, instead
yeah.
I pay either Palo Alto or Fortinet, make use of their research teams, their rule creations, etc.
Okay,
Okay, so
and
yeah.
these devices that you have mentioned, around
Hmm.
seven of them, will we be covering the security aspect of it? Because I have done, I have gone through some of them during my CCNP studies as well, CCNA studies as well. So, are we going to cover the same concepts, or the concepts would be quite different from? We're going to cover the security. This is what I am assuming, that we'll be only covering the security aspects of these devices.
Correct.
So if you're
So
talking
for
about a switch, maybe, uh,
right,
mhm.
mostly it's going to be from the security perspective only.
Okay.
Okay, I mean, obviously, I mean, I cannot talk CCNA level stuff with respect to switch and routers and then also cover
Yeah.
security. Okay, the main
Mhm.
focus is security. And then within the S core, since you can see we are trying to cover so many different products, okay,
Mhm.
and the way that the S core is, it does not really want you to go into too much in depth on either of the technologies. Okay,
Right.
so you basically just touch the surface, but you need to touch the surface for a lot of different products. Okay, so you need to know what Umbrella is, what SIG does, what maybe Duo does, what ESA, WSA does. Okay, now in addition to this S core, if someone really wants to deep dive into, let's say, ICE,
Mm-hmm.
okay, they really want to understand the nitty-gritties, the inside out of ICE, right? So for those, we run separate modules. Okay,
Okay.
where we just cover, so let's say when I do ICE, it's primarily just ICE for about 40-50 hours. Okay, and in comparison, we are running S core, which would be about 60-70 hours in total. Okay, so you can see the
Right.
difference in the content that we will be covering within the S core. Okay, so for every single product that I have mentioned, we do run individual modules as well. So individual modules for ASA, firewall, for VPN, for ICE, for ESA, WSA, where we primarily just learn and nitty-gritties of each of those products in detail. So that's how the kind of structure is, what we are trying to
So
achieve.
ESCOR is the only yeah, certification over here which would enable me to be CCNP security certified, right?
S core plus one of the concentration exams.
Plus one of the concentration exams, so it
Yes,
could be one of these technologies that you have just mentioned,
correct,
maybe an
correct.
IAC.
Right.
So,
That's why we run individual modules as well, so that you get to know S core, and then you do your reading, you do your studies, etc., through any
okay.
books and everything, and then you get prepared for the S core, and then for individuals, we do those
For
as well.
CCNP Enterprise, I'd done an on-core and an RC course.
Right. So it's
Uh,
the same thing,
Same thing, yeah, as well.
right? So
So
if you maybe
probably I'll have
do
to choose what I need to do apart from the ESCOR.
right.
Uh, from so how whom can I just speak to someone else regarding this, or would you be suggesting like what do we have on the plate
You can talk to the support team.
supporting? Okay,
Right.
I'll yeah,
You could discuss it with them. If you have any questions on the technical side of perspective, you can discuss it with me. Okay.
sure, sure. Thank you so much for
No
answering all
problem.
these questions.
Yep. Anyone else has any questions? Okay, then I think we should be
Yeah,
good.
hello.
Yes, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, I newly joined this CCNP Security. Okay,
Hmm.
so actually, I was planning to enroll this CCI Security.
Okay.
Okay, so it is means it is required to go for CCNP Security, then CCI, or I can directly do this CCI Security.
So the thing now with CCI is there is no CCI written exam. Okay.
Okay,
So you have to, any which ways, study and pass S core.
okay,
Okay. So once you pass S core, you don't have to do CCNP. Okay. So when you do and pass S core, you basically get a specialist certification for security core, and then you directly become eligible to appear and book your CCI lab.
okay, okay,
Okay, so earlier on we used to, so there were no prerequisites. You could do a CCI written exam and then appear for the lab. Okay, so now they've kind of streamlined it. They've removed CCI. They've removed the CCNP's requirement or prerequisite to be a CCNA. So there's no prerequisites now for CCNP. You can directly start at S core, and if you want to do CCNP, you
Score
can
which
do the CCNP.
CCNP score, or you're talking about CCI?
There is just a single there's just a single core S core. Okay, so for every technology, for enterprise you'll have an EN core. Okay, if you want to do DC, you'll have a DC core.
Okay.
Okay, so in our case, it's basically for security we have an S core. So that's the only thing that you need to do, and then you can book your lab and appear for the CCI lab.
So in CCI there are two exams, one written and one live exam. Okay, so now they removed,
The
as you are
written.
saying, they removed the written, only this
Correct.
directly lab. Okay, so
Correct.
for the lab, I have to do this S score.
Correct. To appear for the lab, yes.
Okay, okay.
What about the CCNP, NRC, and enterprise? Is
It's the
that
same thing.
also?
It's the same thing. So if you
So
want to do
through that,
enterprise,
yeah, I can do CCI through that. I mean, through that route as well NRC and.
so if you have done the NCore, you are eligible to book your enterprise lab,
Oh,
not the security lab.
not the security, not the enterprise route. Got it.
Correct. Okay. So previously, so it's the same way. Previously, you basically had to give a CCI enterprise or CCI routing and switching written. So you could only do the CCI lab for the routing and switching. After that, it's the same thing now.
And
Okay.
how many of these core exams are there, like for
Every
enterprise?
technology, every track has a core exam. So collaboration has a CL core, DC has a DC core, service
Oh,
provider track has an SP core.
all right. Okay.
Okay.
Got it.
So the wireless track and the enterprise track, they have a single core exam. So you don't have a wireless core exam separately. Okay. So since they call it now enterprise infrastructure, right? So since you have already given the N core, you are subjected to a lot of wireless as well. Okay, so you can just pass the EN core and then be eligible to give either the CCI Enterprise Lab or the CCI Wireless Lab.
The wireless and the enterprise lab. After
Right.
S core,
After EN core.
EN core, and after S core is the security lab.
Correct. Okay. Similarly, if you want to do the data center CCI, you need to do the DC core. Collaboration would be the CL core. Service provider would be SP core. Okay, and then you have the
And for the
CCI.
security, which core? It's called S core, huh?
Right. So the first two initials, I mean, could be enterprise for EN, S for security, collaboration for CL, data
And
center for
this
DC.
also covers ASA configuration in total,
Right.
or is it just that we are just going to do a couple of labs on that or
Yeah,
something?
just the basic. We are not going to dive into too much detail. So whatever you see highlighted as part of the blueprint,
Mm-hmm.
okay, we'll try and cover that.
Got it.
Because
So what is the
again,
duration for this? Okay, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead. Duration for the S core?
Sorry. Yeah, no, duration for this CCNP security.
Duration for the CCNP security. I mean, CCNP security typically, when I run it, so that basically involves running all the modules, which is basically a firewall, ICE, VPN, ESA, WSA, some Stealth Watch and Umbrella as well. So that kind of lasts somewhere around 6 months.
6
Okay,
months only for
because
CCNP.
right, because we kind of cover everything. Okay, but if you just want to do S core and you just want to do one other module, then that might be a much lesser time for you.
Okay.
Okay, if you want the complete CCNP modules, all of them, so that's what the time typically is, from 6 to 7 months.
Yeah,
Because
it's for
again,
only
we are only doing
weekends
right,
or
right.
weekdays.
Since we are doing only weekends.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Bye.
Okay. Any other questions that I can take? Okay. All right then. Thank you so much, guys. Have a
Thank you.
good rest of the day.
Thank you
And
so much.
guys, next weekend. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Bye.